Why do countries trade with each other? Why are some products taxed just for crossing a border? And what happens when governments go to war? Not with bombs, but with tariffs. Today, we're decoding the global system of trade and tariffs, how it works, why it matters, and what happens when it breaks. Welcome to Unravel, Money and Economics. In this channel, we simplify the world of finance, economics, and money, so you can understand how it all works, no matter your background. Let's start with something simple. Why do countries trade in the first place? Why doesn't every country just produce everything it needs on its own? The answer lies in a fundamental economic principle: comparative advantage. Even if a country can produce all goods more efficiently than another, it still benefits by focusing on what it does best and trading for the rest. Let's say Canada can grow bananas, but not as efficiently as Ecuador. At the same time, Ecuador could try to build airplanes, but it would cost a lot more than it would in Canada. So it makes sense for Ecuador to focus on bananas and Canada on aircraft. They trade, and both benefit. This is the foundation of global trade. Countries specialize in producing certain goods and services, then exchange them through international markets. Global trade also creates economic efficiencies. When countries specialize, they can use their resources, land, labor, capital, more effectively. This leads to lower production costs, which usually means lower prices for consumers. Trade opens up access to a wider range of products. It spreads new ideas and technologies. It can boost productivity and drive innovation. Over time, international trade has helped lift millions out of poverty, especially in rapidly growing economies like China and Vietnam. Today, global trade accounts for more than 50% of world GDP. That's a huge share of global economic activity driven by the exchange of goods and services across borders. Your smartphone is a perfect example of how interconnected things have become. It might be designed in California, assembled in China, with chips from Taiwan, displays from South Korea, batteries from Japan, and then shipped to you wherever you live. This interconnectedness is what makes modern economies thrive. But it also creates new challenges, especially when trade becomes politicized. That brings us to tariffs. A tariff is a tax placed on imported goods and services. When a company brings a product from another country, they may have to pay a tax at the border. That added cost often gets passed down to manufacturers, retailers, and ultimately, consumers. There are different types of tariffs. Ad valorem tariffs are based on the product's value. For example, a 10% tax on imported cars. Specific tariffs are fixed fees, like $1 per kilogram of imported rice. Compound tariffs combine both a percentage and a fixed amount. Why do governments impose tariffs? There are a few reasons. To raise government revenue, to protect domestic industries, to retaliate against unfair practices, to promote political or national security goals. Imagine this. If country A is flooding the market with cheap steel, threatening to put country B's steel workers out of business, country B might impose a tariff on imported steel to level the playing field. This kind of protective measure can help local industries survive, but it can also lead to unintended consequences. Tariffs often raise prices for consumers. They reduce competition, and they can strain relationships between countries, especially if they're used frequently or aggressively. That's where trade wars begin. Before we go there, let's talk about two important approaches to trade policy: free trade and protectionism. Free trade means eliminating barriers like tariffs, quotas, or regulations to allow goods and services to flow freely between countries. Supporters of free trade argue that it leads to greater efficiency, lower prices, and stronger economic growth. Free trade encourages innovation, spreads knowledge, and strengthens global ties. But there's another side to the argument: protectionism. Protectionism is when governments try to protect domestic industries by limiting foreign competition. They might use tariffs, import quotas, or subsidies to help local businesses. The goal is to support local jobs, prevent overdependence on foreign suppliers, or protect national security. Free trade creates winners and losers. While consumers benefit from lower prices, some workers and industries may lose their jobs to foreign competition. Protectionism can temporarily shield those industries, but often at the cost of growth and affordability. In 1930, the U.S. passed the Smoot-Hawley Tariff Act, raising tariffs on more than 20,000 imported goods. Other countries retaliated. Global trade shrank. Many historians believe it made the Great Depression worse. To help manage international trade, countries have built systems of agreements and institutions. The biggest one is the World Trade Organization, or WTO. The WTO sets trade rules, helps settle disputes, and encourages members to keep tariffs low. Nearly every country in the world is a member. There are also regional trade blocs, groups of countries that trade with each other on special terms. Examples include the European Union, EU, USMCA, which includes the US, Canada, and Mexico, ASEAN in Southeast Asia, MERCOSUR in South America. These blocs lower or eliminate tariffs within the group, making it easier to trade goods, services, and even labor. There are also bilateral agreements between two countries and multilateral deals like the CPTPP. These agreements promote trade while protecting each country's key interests. They aren't perfect, but they've helped trade expand massively since World War II. What happens when diplomacy fails? That's when we get trade wars. A trade war happens when one country raises tariffs and others retaliate. It's a tit-for-tat strategy that can spiral out of control. Trade slows down, prices rise, companies and workers suffer. Let's take a closer look at a recent trade war between the US and China. In 2018, the US imposed tariffs on hundreds of Chinese products, citing unfair trade practices and intellectual property theft. China responded with its own tariffs, targeting US agricultural goods, vehicles, and electronics. Billions of dollars in trade were affected. American farmers lost key buyers. Chinese tech firms lost access to components. Global markets were shaken. Supply chains were disrupted. And businesses across the world, even those not directly targeted, felt the shockwaves. Trade wars rarely have winners. They usually just redistribute the pain. Tariffs aren't the only tool countries use. There are also non-tariff barriers, measures that restrict trade without directly taxing imports. Let's break them down. Quotas, limits on the amount of a product that can be imported. Embargoes, bans on trade with certain countries, often for political reasons. Sanctions, restrictions placed on specific goods, services, or financial transactions. Other tools are more technical. Product standards, requiring imports to meet strict health, safety, or environmental rules. Currency manipulation, artificially weakening a country's currency to make exports cheaper. Subsidies, giving domestic producers financial support so they can outcompete foreign rivals. All of these tools add layers of complexity to international trade. They blur the line between economics and politics. Behind every trade policy is a supply chain, a global network of production, shipping, and delivery. Let's go back to the smartphone. The screen might be made in South Korea. The chip comes from Taiwan. Assembly happens in China. The software is developed in the US, and the final product is sold in dozens of countries. Disrupt one part of that chain, and the entire process can stall. Recent events have shown just how fragile supply chains can be. The COVID-19 pandemic halted factory production and froze shipping lanes. The 2021 Suez Canal blockage delayed billions in goods. The global chip shortage slowed down the auto industry. Trade is no longer about one country shipping products to another. It's about interconnected systems that power the modern world. So what have we learned? Global trade creates enormous benefits. Lower prices, more innovation, stronger economies. But it also presents challenges: displaced workers, geopolitical tension, environmental concerns. There is no perfect trade system, but understanding how it works gives you power to understand global news, economic policy, and your role as a consumer. So the next time you see a label that says "Made in China" or "Imported from Brazil," remember, you're connected to a global network of decisions, policies, and possibilities. Have a topic you're curious about? Let us know in the comments, and hit subscribe so you don't miss what's next. As we continue to unravel the world of money and economics, one concept at a time.